1.
This is Mark Sims here. Good afternoon, everybody. It's 4 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get the meeting started. The first is a call to order and roll call.
David Nigro,
Present.
Mike Manley,
Present.
Linda Bove, Michael Gordon,
Present.
Dean Howard,
Present.
Mark Sims,
Present.
Sue K. Kneifel,
Present.
Shelley Herbold,
Present.
Lynn Davison is present.
So we have everybody here. Thank you, everybody, for attending. The next item is the Asdb accountability model, a presentation by Superintendent Reichman. Thank you.
Good afternoon, President Sims, members of the Board of Directors, Assistant Superintendent Rex, and those of you in the audience. Welcome to this afternoon's board meeting. A few weeks ago, President Sims asked us to provide a presentation on our AZ merit results. For those of you who are not familiar with AZ merit, that is our Arizona State Assessment testing systems that all students throughout the states have to take on an annual basis. And that includes our student, Asdb. So the AZ merit is one test that we provide to our students, and we get scores and results on that test. I really appreciate President Sims giving us the opportunity to present on this, because this is a very critical conversation that we should all be having. If you look at our proposed strategic priorities, in strategic priority 3, we focus on student achievement and student engagement. So the AZ merit is one major measure of our student success. So this is so important that in our agenda, you will see 20 minutes given to 2 speakers to talk about this. And because we have given 20 minutes to those 2 speakers, I have asked the executive directors not to provide verbal reports. They've given written reports. The only person that will be giving a verbal report will be the Assistant Superintendent Rex. Before I introduce the 2 speakers, I have several thoughts to share with you. One is that the AZ merit testing is really just a snapshot in a moment of time of what that student learned and knows in that moment of time. It doesn't really provide comprehensive reflection of everything that student knows. The second thought is that when we try to create a well-designed accountability model that truly represents everything our students have achieved, we find out pretty quickly it's very complicated and it requires multiple measures. So how do we do that? And then the third thought I wanted to share with you is that this goes back to using data to make data-driven decisions. And AZ merit has an important part of that decision-making process. So with that, I'm going to introduce Melissa DeVries, who is our Director of Federal Programs, and Oren Katkov, who's our Director of the Curriculum. Turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, President Sims, Superintendent Reichman, Assistant Superintendent Rex. It is our honor to be here this evening and to talk to you a little bit about the data. The first thing that I want to mention is we did add one chart to the charts that were originally handed out to you. They're in front of you now. We thought it was very important that you receive, as well as our students' proficiency and student with IEP proficiency, the proficiency rate of all students overall in the state of Arizona. So with that said, we should have a slide coming up. There we go. So this report, as Superintendent Reichman alluded to, is not just our AZ Merit data, but a lot of different pieces of data that we look at together to determine where our students are and where our next steps are in helping them in this progress. So next slide. How are we doing? The first thing we wanted to present to you was our co-op information. And we have been requesting for quite some time data on our co-op students. And through the work of Bob Lee and ADE, we were finally able to really get some good data the last 2 years on our co-op students and how they're doing on the AZ Merit. With that said, one of the things that you need to consider is the students that are in the co-ops are getting their primary services, their curriculum services through that school district. And so our involvement is making sure that those students have access to the general curriculum. And so with that, I'm gonna go ahead and go to that first slide.
Whoa.
Or not. Yeah.
That's quite a desktop.
Not our desktop.
No. So I'm going to just talk about this while they're pulling it up. You'll notice that there's one column, and that's Eastern Highland Regions that has no data. They do have data, but the N number is so small that for confidentiality, it's not being reported here. You can also see on the bottom of the scales there, we have also put the N number, so you can see that DVR had 110 kids reporting, and then so on down the line. The blue data is for ELA, or it's for 2017, and the orange data is for 2018. Okay, next slide. Our next slide is the math data for our regional co-ops. And again, this math data is AZ Merit only. As they're pulling it up, you can see, again, we have 2017 data, 2018 data. Southwest Regional Cooperative has quite a high score there, but they also only have 27 students reporting. So there we go. All right, next slide. So how are we doing as campuses? We have ASB, ASD, and Pdsd. And the data that we're about to look at here are data from AZ Merit and what's called MSAA, which is the Multi-States Alternative Assessment. We have a fairly large number of our students who take the ALT assessment, where generally in a public school district it's 1% of the population or less. Ours is more. This data came from ADE's website, and we will be sharing that with you right now. So next slide. What types of academic data do we collect on our students? And as Superintendent Reichman said, we start with an AZ Merit, which is our big summative. It shows how we're doing comparatively to other students in the state, and through our general ed students compared to our students in our campuses, as well as students with IEPs. But it is just one piece. All of these things listed here are things that we use to get a full picture of our students. So that's the AZ Merit, the MSAA, AIMS Science, the Ames alternate science for our intellectually disabled children, our NWEA map data, which Oren will be talking about in a few minutes, Galileo data, teacher-created data such as portfolios, informal assessments, and other data sources related to IEPs. Next slide, please. So on the right is the blue colors, and those are our ELA colors. And on the left is the math colors, which is the orange colors. So the first school that we reported on is ASB. So the data that you have is for ASB over a 4-year period, 2015, 16, 17, and 18. In the bottom corner of this, or in the top corner of this slide, is students with an IEP in the state. So that's actually in the handout that we gave you. And you could see it's pretty steady in the state. You can also look at the data from ASB and see that we are performing better in some areas, in some years, than students with IEPs the state average. And then the other data that we added to compare this to was our Arizona state passing rate. And right now, the state passing rate is 41% for all students in the state of Arizona on the AZ merit. So next slide. Okay, the next slide is ASD. And again, there's an area there where we have a small in count, and so we had no score. Again, the scores that are in the blue are for ELA. The scores in the orange are for math. And you can see again, there's some areas that we're doing better than the state average for other students on IEPs. And then again, the same average scores for all populations with the state. Okay, next slide, please. So the next slide here is Pdsd data. And again, ELA in blue, math in orange, and then the state percent passing with IEPs. And with this, you could see that there's a little bit of ups and downs with this data, and Oren's going to talk about that in a nutshell here.
Good evening. In a nutshell, when we look at the 3 schools over the years, the students who we currently have that are passing the AZ Merit and the ALT exam are continuing to pass the AZ Merit and the ALT exam. In the areas where we see from year to year it drops, that tends to be from kids graduating. So an area we need to focus on is when our kids are coming in and they're passing it, they're continuing to pass it. If they're coming in and they're not passing it, we're not ratcheting them up to that next threshold to pass it. So as a district, we need to start thinking about what are we doing differently programmatic-wise to give the teachers what they need to ensure that all students are growing. So if you come in low and you're not passing it, within a couple of years, hopefully we can get you passing the AZ Merit. If we go to the next slide. So what I'm going to focus on is our benchmark testing. At each of our schools, we do benchmark testing 3 times a year. We do it in the fall, the winter, and the spring. That's something we're doing consistent as of this year. The fall testing is over. We've now gotten the fall testing data. We're analyzing that. The teachers are analyzing that to really drive instruction. So if you go to the next slide, we'll start by looking at some school level data. If you go to the next slide. So what you're looking at here is ASD's MAP reading scores, and it's a comparison from the spring, which would be the spring of last year, and the most current fall data. So if you take a look at this, the gray line would be last year towards the end of the year in the spring. So let's look, if we look at the 8th grade data and we go up, that gray line is at a 210. The RIT score is at a 210. In the fall, which would be this year, that kid has now progressed a year, so that child is in 9th grade. If you look at the blue line, it's at a 219. So for that class, from 8th grade last year to 9th grade this year, that class has already shown a 9-point RIT difference to where it's going up, which is good. In a lot of cases, when you look at benchmark data, there will be a dip between the spring and the fall because there's the summer, and a lot of kids will kind of digress during the summer, which is why I wanted to show this graph. If you look from last year to this year, gray line to blue line, at our schools, we did a pretty good job this year of making up any kind of difference if there wasn't that dip. Most kids, either they scored the same from the spring to the fall, or they scored up a little higher. If there was a change, it was a minor change within the RIT scores, which what that tells me is that our teachers right out of the gate this year are moving forward with good instruction and using data to make sure to meet the kids where they're at and to focus on growth. The following slide is the same concept. It's for PDSD. And again, comparing where those kids were in the spring to the fall, we're not seeing the dip like we would have in the past. That red line is, it's a line from 2000, I believe, 15. It's what's called the deaf mean. It's kind of a leaked line that came out from the MAP NWA. For us, it's really used just as I guess our own benchmark to say if all students who are identified as deaf or hard of hearing are sort of scoring where this red line is, where are we scoring in, I guess, relative comparison to that line? So that's what the red line is. Hopefully, in a year or two when we come back, that line will be below where our scores are as we're moving forward. If we go to the next slide, we're going to get a little more granular and look at class data. And we'll start with ASB. ASB uses a report called Galileo for their benchmarking. And what you see here is a Galileo report. When we look at Galileo, it groups students into high risk of not being proficient, moderate risk, low risk, and on course. For this class, these students all landed in that moderate risk. Within the Galileo, if you click on that report, and we'll go ahead and go to the next slide, it allows teachers to look at it question by question on what did those students miss and what did they achieve. What's cool with this report is as a teacher, you can do error analysis to really see what concepts your class knows and which concepts you might have to reteach. For example, if I was this teacher, if I look at question 26, it's all in the green. All my students got that correct. So if I taught that, I can feel confident that they learned it. If I haven't taught that yet, I might not spend that much time on it knowing that my kids already know it. Whereas if you look at question number 10, all the kids got it wrong, but they all answered the same wrong answer. It was D. So in doing error analysis, I can look at the correct answer and ask myself, why did everybody in my class answer D? What was the distractor within that where they thought that was the right answer? And lastly, if you look at question 16, all the kids got it wrong, but some answered B, some answered C, and some answered A. So as a teacher, either I haven't taught that and everybody's guessing, or if I did teach it, they didn't learn it, so it's something that I'm going to have to readdress. Another report that's being used through the Galileo, we go to the next slide. If you click on the next report, it will tell the teacher exactly what standards need to be focused on to move those kids from low risk to on course. So it really helps the teachers pinpoint where their instruction has to be when we move forward. If we go to the next slide, ASD and PDSD use NWA's MAP, which is another benchmarking tool. What you see up here is called the quadrant report. The pink quadrant is low achievement, low growth. The orange one above that is low achievement, high growth. The green quadrant is high achievement, high growth, and the yellow one is high achievement, low growth. Each of those dots in there is a child and a subject. So, like that purple square is reading, the triangle is science, the diamond is language use, and the plus sign is math. What's neat with this report is as a teacher, I can look at this and see, in this case, I have about 5 students that are in that high growth, high achievement. I can start analyzing what did I do that first semester to have success with these students, and what do I need to continue to do to continue to have growth with these success with these kids. If we look in that pink quadrant, we have a couple kids that are sitting down there kind of in the low growth, low achievement area. As an educator or as a grade level team, we would have to have a discussion of what's going on with these kids and what might we need to try differently. Whatever we're doing didn't have, based on this data point, what we're doing might not have had the effect that we wanted, so we need to discuss what can we do differently, how can we change our instruction, how can we change our materials to try to access these kids. In this graph, you can see there's 3 students that are in that high achievement, low growth. Those are those kids that they get it, they're doing great, but maybe they're bored. So that's a whole nother problem of they get it, but how are we really stretching them to continue to grow? If we go to the next slide, it's something very similar. This is a middle school slide. As Melissa mentioned, a lot of our students come to us and they're very far behind academically to where maybe passing the AZ merit is not going to be realistic for a year, 2 years, or even 3 years. What's nice with this report, in this case, we can see that this teacher, the majority of the kids are either in that high achievement, high growth, or in that low achievement, high growth. So even though those kids came in below grade level, this teacher is doing a fantastic job of them having above average growth, which eventually is going to get them out of that low growth quadrant. Just to throw out some props, Renee Jantz here at Pdsd is a middle school teacher, as a former middle school teacher. Those are some tough kids to get to, and based on some of this data, she's doing a fantastic job of showing growth with them. Without use of data like this, we can't, AZ Merit's not going to give us this. It's just going to tell us if they're proficient or not. Okay. And that's something that's really cool about the MAP test. The next slide, also on the MAP test, you go ahead and you click on your kids, you click on your class, and it tells you exactly where those kids are and what standards to focus on. So again, it kind of takes the guessing game away from the teachers. It really lets them know here are some areas that you want to focus on to get the biggest bang for your buck with your students. And if you want to turn to the next slide, what we've done this year is we're identifying what we call our bubble kids. We're trying to find the students who haven't been passing the AZ merit but are close, and really analyzing what's it going to take to move them into proficient. Then as you can see, there's more than one bubble on this slide. Then we have to step down and say, okay, for this next group, who are maybe a couple years removed, what do we need to do for that group? And start looking child by child, group by group, and saying, what are we going to do about this kid? It's been exciting to see these teacher teams look at this data and really talk about instruction and growth. And you know, from my previous work in school improvement, I do feel that as long as teachers are talking about learning and growth and adequate growth, everybody is going to keep moving ahead.
Okay, our last slide is pulling it all together. And recently, some of you participated in the interviews for our accreditation. And the accreditation was a good exercise. It was a good chance for us to really dig down into our data and see what we were doing well and see areas that we need to improve. Accreditation looks at systems and it looks at student data, where our strategic initiatives that Annette has talked about breaks it down into 5 different areas. Some of them is how we are using our resources that may indirectly impact our student achievement, how we are using our leadership training, what we are doing for teacher PD, where the needs are, and putting our time and energy into those areas that still need improvement. And finally, there is school improvement and being put in to school improvement. We talked about this last year when Orrin and I did a presentation for the board. It is truly an opportunity, and it has allowed us to focus in. We had not previously been collecting any benchmark data. That is one of the requirements of school improvement, is looking at benchmark data. Through the school improvement, we have implemented the plus days, where it's a different type of instruction going on in those days, and a time for teachers to interact with each other, to dig down into their data, and to make some changes. We have already held several trainings on looking at data and then creating and amending your lessons and what you're teaching based on that data. We're going to continue to do that. We're continuing to support the teachers through their plus days. In the past, we have never asked so much of our teachers. They truly have a lot on their plates with learning the new ELA curriculum, learning the new behavior curriculum, and learning how to analyze these quarterly benchmarks in order to improve instruction. So with that said, we are going to have growth, but it is going to be slow. And Annette has used the analogy of the roots of the bamboo tree, and this is where we are right now. We're growing the roots. We're training our people, we're supporting our people, and we may not see that many kids bump over into passing AZ Merit right away. We have a lot of our kids that are in the lowest quadrant, the number 1 area, which falls far behind. The work that we do this year may only move them up in that quadrant or over into quadrant 2, which is still not passing. We have to be a number 3 in order for them to pass. But we truly believe that the systems that we're all putting in place, that we're all working towards, are going to eventually have those results.
And kind of end on that focus on strategic initiatives, as an agency, we've been collecting data for a long time. The NWA scores have been taken, that test has been taken for a long time. Dr. Jackson, who's here, has had that data for a long time, but it hasn't necessarily been a strategic initiative of now how are we going to use that data. My analogy is if you have a car, we've had the transmission, but it's been over here. We've had the engine, but it's over here. We've had 4 tires out in the front lawn. We're finally, through the strategic initiative, kind of putting that car together to make sure that each piece complements the next piece, so we can actually have a running vehicle that gets where it needs to go. Any questions?
Any questions, comments?
This is Mike Manley.
This is Linda Bowe.
Oh, go ahead, Linda.
Oh, is that okay? Just a wonderful presentation. Thank you for that. Learned a lot. I'm just curious as to what causes these students to be behind. Is there a cause or a reason behind that? Why students are working so hard to get caught up? What is the source of that issue, if you could?
Honestly, it goes back to, I think we need to look at it child by child and see where's each child at and then what we're going to do. the issue of language comes up quite a bit, that, a lot of our students come to us lacking language. So we're teaching them their first language as well as their second language, and that comes up quite a bit. But I think in trying to move every child ahead, we need to look at every child as a unique situation and ask, where is the child, and what are we going to do to move this kid forward?
Thank you. And I'm glad you mentioned that, and that has to be recognized and considered and focused on as a main issue, I believe. Language acquisition, and that causes a ripple effect, and it's hard for those children to catch up. And I appreciate your comment in that we're recognizing it. Thank you.
Yep. And in those school improvement initiatives, we have focused on an English language arts curriculum, which was purchased over the summer and is being implemented this year. We currently are putting together an ASL committee to look at how are we teaching that, and to see what kind of curriculum or what kind of pattern we can teach ASL in to make sure that it works. Right now, whether teachers are kind of up to their own device to decide how they're going to teach ASL and when. And it's a language. With every language, there are best practices involved in how to teach a language. And so right now, Tina Schartzer, Rose Andrea Kohler are finding other people within the agency to be part of that committee to research what's out there nationwide that we might want to adopt here in the agency.
Thank you.
This is Mike Manley. So we did initiate the new ELA curriculum. I know that usually there's a fairly gross dip when you institute a new, even if it's a much, much better, more consistent curriculum. We haven't had the AZ Merit test scores that are going to reflect that. And I know that the curriculum that we had some fairly robust interventions for those bottom left quartile kiddos. I don't know what the feedback has been on implementing that new curriculum, and if we're satisfied with how those intervention pieces go for those kids, and if it's even appropriate for those kids that are taking the MSAA, or if we need to continue to look for other interventions for those kids specifically. And then when we start to focus on getting a consistent math curriculum, we can expect that type of a dip a year after as well. Is that?
So the math curriculum, knock on wood, hopefully in February or March, we will be in front of the board proposing what the math team found and what they're hoping that we can adopt. We've done, I would say, perception data, focus groups with the teachers on how is the new curriculum going. The National Geographic curriculum is I'm trying to think of a behemoth of a curriculum.
Robust.
Yeah, we kind of call it the choose your own adventure, to where, well, if I do this, where's this going to go? So we've provided additional training for teachers in that. We've provided time for them outside of school to receive stipends to research it, because there's so much there. It's impossible for somebody to master that within a year. Broad stroke comments, K2 seems to really like it. They are having to create some of their own materials to fill in some of the skills that the students haven't gotten to yet, or that they've come in lacking some skills to where in your Stepford district, they would already know them. And so that's something in the future, hopefully we can help the teachers fill that in, kind of that tier 2, tier 3 materials of what they're going to need. As we move up, it gets a little more frustrating for the teachers because the students are behind. Our middle school is using it. They're asking us to get additional materials in some areas, so we're finding the dollars to get them what they believe they need from National Geographic. Our high school is also using it, but right now it's really finding out what's there, where the students are, and what's that best match. The way the National Geographic's laid out is that you basically have a foundational book, then a level A, a level B, and a level C. And so in a lot of cases, they're using the foundations book, which is okay. I mean, they have the data that this is where the child's at, and now it's just a matter of finding out what within that book is best to use to then kind of expedite that learning. And we'll see with the scores how that pans out. So.
But if they dip, it's normal, and it takes 2 years to become experts in a curriculum, so just for the, I'm sure the board knows this, but not to fret if they dip, because our teachers are not experts in this curriculum yet, so
And thank you for
time will,
thank you for
time
pointing
will,
that out.
yeah, and Nat Geo's, it looks great.
It's a very visual curriculum,
Yes.
which is one of the reasons that they wanted it. And it ties in social studies and science while you're teaching the ALA content, so you're covering a lot of ground at one time. Any other questions?
Thank you very much. That was excellent.
Oh, thank you.
Next is 1.03, call to the public for agendized items. First is Lindsay De Hoyos, perspective of a parent concerning 7.07 election. It'll be 3 minutes. At 2.5 minutes, I'll stand up and then ask you to stop at 3.
Hello, my name is Lindsay De Hoyos. Hello to all of the ASDB board members. I just wanted to talk about the election and the leadership from the board members. I just wanted to talk about an analogy with you. So just think about individuals who are blind. They have various needs. Some might just have light issues. They might have Ushered syndrome, where they have peripheral issues. So they have different needs as far as their vision is concerned. And my father, he had Parkinson's disease. And so he wasn't able to access all buildings because all buildings were not wheelchair accessible. Or if there was an accessible ramp, he had to go around the building. And so it was a struggle for him. So I would ask all of you to think outside of the box in terms of deaf education. And some people believe in one approach while others believe in another. So by thinking outside of the box, just think of each deaf child and all their various needs. Some are able to use spoken English and some are not. And it really depends too on parent exposure and how they were raised. And so what I would like to see here at this school is to give all opportunities to our children, not just one approach versus another. What really scares me is we talk a lot about the listening and spoken language approach. And in mainstream programs and other oral spoken language type programs, really anywhere they have exposure to that. But at schools for the deaf, like ASDB, they can get different services and we can really meet each child where they're at and really provide different opportunities for them so that they can catch up on what they've missed out on and give them different exposure to different people and to different language styles and approaches. So I am from Boston, and they are very much in support of bilingual methods. They don't choose one approach versus another. Here it seems there's a lot of pushback between each camp, and so I'd like to see those two camps partner with each other using sign language and listening and spoken language so that we can do what's best for the deaf children and really meet their needs. And so for the board members sitting there listening, if you're feeling like you don't know enough about deaf education, or if you don't feel like you're able to contribute to that discussion, we would like to elect people who do know about that, because a lot of the board members are quite quiet when we're making decisions, and we'd like to have members who are knowledgeable and engaged, and so that makes me nervous when we think about the election that's approaching. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Ronald Hazlitt-Telly.
And we'll be speaking about the dorms, correct? This is the turn to take for speaking about the dorms. Excuse me one moment. Okay, and I mean, there was a lot of traffic on my drive up here, and I know won't be going back to Tucson until tomorrow, so kind of a hassle to get here. But my name is Ronald Hazlitt Talley, and I live in Tucson. Hello to the board members, President Sims, Superintendent Reichman, Superintendent Rex. I'd like to talk to you about the dorms today. I did send you an email last week, or on September 13th, excuse the interpreter. I'd like to talk about the dorms. So essentially the enrollment percentage at ASD has gone down. So, and ASDB has plenty of classroom space in both their elementary, middle, and high school. And so they have over 68 acres. One moment for the interpreters, I'm sorry. Just correct them. So the interpreter's just clarifying with him because we did receive a similar letter that he sent out, but it was different, so we didn't want to misinterpret what he was saying. So talking about the dorms, we think the dorm experience is wonderful for students. And I know that there's been talk about closing those dorms, and I disagree with doing that because deaf and hard of hearing students, this is a very small community. And they typically live very far from schools for the deaf, and there they'd be very isolated. There's not a lot of services there, and if students were back in their home school districts, it would cost a lot more for ASDB. They'd be very lonely. They wouldn't have language opportunities or social opportunities, and that's one reason they're living in the dorm. The dorm is such a language-rich environment, such a rich experience for them. They have peers there. They're able to build self-confidence there, find happiness and joy amongst others who are similar to them. So the dorms were established in 1912, and it was a place where students could join, be exposed to American Sign Language and language, and develop that language. They were there all day and slept there rather than staying at home with families who didn't sign, where they fell behind in their education. They had these social opportunities and an opportunity to acquire language by living at the dorm. And if parents are considering sending their children to ASDB, I would really recommend they come and take a tour and see what dorm life is like, what campus life is like, and what the educational opportunities are there. I really encourage them to send their students there for the betterment of their students. I really discourage you from closing the dorms for students who live too far to attend the school for the deaf. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Next is Harvey Goodstein.
Hello, President, board members, superintendent, friends, parents, audience members. Really, I'm very excited to see the proposal from Annette and your staff about the feasibility proposal. I think that this is a great start. I think that it's vital that the board support that. And not just limit it to the questions that appear on the feasibility study, but any other relevant questions that may arise. The problem with it being the small number of students and that starting a question about closing the students due to low number of students without giving consideration to the other vital factors that are involved in the full education would be a huge mistake impacting students around the state. And this may happen not because parents want their students to attend public school, but that's Law 142 that was passed in '75. Before that, many schools for the deaf had quite large numbers of attendance. But after this law was passed, there was a gross misinterpretation of this law by local or municipal agencies. That law, taken at face value, is good for many students who have disabilities in school. When a student goes into kindergarten who has language already, they're made accessible. But many of our students have parents or families who do not communicate with them or are unable to. Therefore, once they enter kindergarten, they are already at a disadvantage without language and unable to progress. I've seen programs around when I was the director of the Institute for the Deaf in the 90s, and I visited schools, large programs like Asdb, small programs, and I always feel great, but the numbers are always small. The problem is it's not just one student. It's a horror story that applies to most of our students. Those students who are alone in mainstream programs are the only one like themselves. If you can imagine going to a school for the deaf and you knew no sign language, all of the kids around you start signing, conversing, and sure, you had an interpreter who was willing to interpret for you, and they were skilled. But it wasn't just for an hour or a quick presentation or a week or a year. This is 15 years of your education, getting all of your information through an interpreter about what a peer said, about what a friend may have said. You may have one friend who is your interpreter. It's such a sad story. With the prospect of closing the dorms, where do our students go? They become lost in the cracks. So the report about AZ Merit that we just had, it's a challenge. It's a challenge to the board to be open-minded, to be visible in the classroom, to be asking teachers questions about what their challenges are, why they're seeing language delays.
Okay, thank you very much.
So you'll see that. Thanks.
Next is James Wilson.
Hello, President Sims, Superintendent Reichman, Assistant Superintendent Rex, ASDB board members. I am here on behalf of the Arizona Association for the Deaf as their acting president, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit about your proposal for the feasibility study. What I'd like you to keep in mind is that I am an alumni of ASDB. I was in the school since I was 4 years old, and a lot of you are outsiders, and you are making decisions whether or not to close the dorm or not without public or professional input. Asking the professionals who work at ASDB and Pdsd, not asking them their opinion would be a huge misservice to the community. I think talking to all stakeholders involved would be vital before you decide to close the dorm. And I did share the letter with all of you last week. I did send a follow-up letter to the Governor Ducey.
It's not an agendized item.
And so I also sent a follow-up letter to them. And if you have any questions about either of the letters that I sent, please be in touch with me. And talking about board leadership, first of all, I want to give a round of applause to all of you, to the board members. Thank you so much for your work and your service for children who are deaf, hard of hearing, and blind. In regards to the elections, I would really like you to consider who your next leader might be. Our letter, I believe, does clearly explain our dissatisfaction with Mark Sims as board president, so please keep in mind who you decide to elect for the coming election, who the community supports. Please keep that in mind. And all of these different opportunities for our children, for deaf, hard of hearing, blind, and visually impaired children, really are we all have similar goals. Literacy is critical for them, and so please keep that in mind when you're making your selections. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is 1.04, Executive Team Reports, starting with Human Resources.
Sorry, let me interrupt. The HR, IT, operations, and agency relations are not giving a verbal report.
Oh, okay.
They provided a written report. So if you have questions, now would be the time to ask. And then we'll move to the Assistant Superintendent verbal report.
Assistant Superintendent.
Thank you. President Sims and board members, I've submitted for you the review of how our cooperative directors and school principals are building leadership capacity, building learning capacity, and building their resource capacity. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer those. But what I'd really like to do is thank you. We had some board members that had the opportunity to come and participate in our Advanced Ed accreditation, which was 2.5 pretty grueling days of some outside educational leaders coming to Arizona and going and asking a lot of deep questions. And so thank you, Lynn Davison, thank you, David Nigro, and thank you, Suke, for taking that time and making that happen. Also, probably more than anything, I just want to thank our staff and students. They participated, they gave honest input. I had the privilege of driving some people, and what I got from the people that came to take an outsider educational leadership view of our agency and our campuses was, you have some great things started, and we'd like to come back in 3 years and see where you're going, because it sounded like they got where we were, they got where we want to be, and they see that we have some definite paths to get where we need to be. So, thank you.
Okay. Next is 1.05, Superintendent's Report.
All right, I have two real short announcements, and then I will give my superintendent's report. The announcements are that in looking at the January board agenda, there will be two things added to that agenda. One will be my state of the agency report. Following what we did last January, we will do it again next January. With that will be our agency profile report. If you remember, I passed out a profile report to you last January. That has been updated. We might update it a little bit more, but we're going to be passing that out to you as well. And that report includes the different metrics, some of which we've already talked about a little bit earlier this afternoon. So those two are my announcements. So getting into the superintendent's report, I really just wanted to talk about the accreditation review, that experience that we had. You've already heard some from Melissa and Owen and the Assistant Superintendent Rex about this. We had the accreditation review October 22nd to 24th. It was 3 days of in-depth review by a 4-member team who came and really met a lot of people, including 3 of you here on the board, Lynn Davison, David Nigro, and Suke Nightfall. The 3 of you met with and were interviewed by the Advanced Ed accreditation team. And thank you for doing that. Really appreciate you taking the time to do that. The accreditation team met with, as Assistant Superintendent Rex said, with many teachers, with many students, with parents. They didn't just interview and meet with the campuses. They also met with our cooperative regional directors and teachers as well. So it was truly an agency review, not just school review. I wanted to share with you on that first day my job my task was to open up with the ASDB story. And you guessed it, the story was the Chinese bamboo tree, right? Of course, that's our story here. So I shared with them that we have this Chinese farmer who planted a bamboo seed and who every day was bringing the water and fertilizing and making sure the other plants didn't block the sun, and was doing that for a long time. And it took 5 years to see results. At the end of the 5th year, we had this result of this growth happening seemingly overnight, 80 feet in 6 weeks. And then had a discussion about what that meant in the intervening 5 years that we were growing roots. And then I expanded that metaphor with them, saying we had 5 roots, which aligned with our proposed strategic priorities. And I detailed the strategic priorities. I talked about communication, relationship building, early childhood development and achievement, student achievement and engagement, and staff leader development, and then resource management. Went through all 5 of those. And would you know it, they liked that metaphor so much that 2 days later, in the closing meeting, they told me to expand it. And to expand the metaphor by adding digging out an irrigation ditch so that we can be irrigating the roots of the bamboo tree. Just to let you know that.
What is that, though?
Of course, there were more serious conversation during the final meeting. And although we won't get a report until, I think, the end of November, there were some feedback that they shared with us that I do want to share with you. The first piece of the feedback is, what are we doing well? What are we being successful with? And they told us there were 4 things that we were doing very well. The first thing they pointed out to us was that in meeting our leaders, our staff, our parents, our students, the children, the one common theme that came up over and over and over again was our commitment and passion for providing the best education and supports to our students. That was universal. The second thing they said about us was that when they met and talked with the students and the parents, that the students and the parents very much appreciated our effort to provide a safe and caring learning environment for them. The third thing they pointed out, which I wasn't expecting to hear, was that our leadership team, our teachers and our staff were, in their term, courageous for really taking on the charge to become student-centered in our efforts and our work. And then the last thing they pointed out to us, which again I wasn't expecting to hear, is that we, the leaders, have an expectation that we will behave and interact with, and they use the term collegiality, which I thought was an interesting term, that the leaders purposefully, we work together with collegiality, and we are modeling that behavior. And in modeling that behavior, it's starting to trickle down to our staff, which I thought was awesome feedback. Then, of course, they gave us other feedback. And I'm going to just summarize those very quickly. They did it according to themes, and they fit the themes with our proposed strategic priorities. So I'm going to run through those pretty quickly. Theme 1 was curriculum. We must implement a comprehensive curriculum in our schools. The curriculum must be aligned with the academic standards, must be implemented with fidelity. We must do the analysis and use data to inform and adjust how we provide instruction to our students. And the last one, which I thought was very interesting, we need to learn how to empower our students to take responsibility to monitor their own learning and progress, which is very interesting. So that was theme 1, which of course fits in with strategic priority 3. The second theme, which I'm going to call it a cultural theme. It really is that we as leaders must communicate and embed in the culture of the agency our vision and mission so that we can all articulate it and that our communities that we work with and serve know our vision and mission. The second thing, which again is culture, is that we create systems and processes for making data-driven decisions. The third thing that they gave to us is we need to meet the needs of our students individually, on an individual level. And the way for us to do that is to use longitudinal data to show growth, which I think we're starting to do with the MAP and the Galileo. And to use that, again, to improve and adapt to meet the needs of our students for academic success. Theme 4 was professional development. And this one was interesting because they had a whole list of things that they commented on that. I'm not going to talk about everything they shared with us. I'm just going to point out 2 things. One is that we need to have a professional development plan that aligns with and supports our students' needs for instruction, so that we provide support to our teachers and staff that in turn supports the students. And the second thing they pointed out, which I'm still not sure what this means, they noted that in our classroom, we were not using digital technology as well as we could be. They saw ways that we could be improving to embed digital technology to support instruction of our students. And then the 5th theme was, of course, resource management, that we need to implement a resource management plan that incorporates building renewal, planning, and equipment refresh cycles planning. We don't have that yet, so we need to develop those plans to support our students and their needs. So we have a lot of work to do. We're doing great work, and we have a lot more work to do. So for me as a superintendent, as I go back to that metaphor of digging out a ditch here for irrigating the roots of the bamboo tree, how do we do that? How do we create a system that consistently supports and strengthens the systems and the foundations that we need that will support the student growth that we're looking for. And that's my report as superintendent.
Thank you. Any questions?
Lynn Davison, will we get a written report with a breakdown of a lot of that information so we know what to focus on and what we can support and
Yes.
go forward with?
I'm sorry to mention that. It was in my notes. Yes, we will be getting a report, I think by the end of November.
Okay.
I'm happy to forward that to you
Yes.
because I want everyone to see
Yeah.
what the accreditation team has to say about us and to use that information to guide us into our planning for future improvements, what we need to improve on. So yes, I will forward that to you and I will make it available to anyone who's interested.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Did they have any specific recommendations for the digital tools or strategies that we need, or was it more of a general? What
The
was-
wrap-up session was very general.
Okay.
It was mostly what I just shared with you. We don't have any specifics yet, right?
Did you get a sense that it was, this is Mike Manley, by the way, sorry, that it was like an assistive technology issue or a implementation of the curriculum issue? Because those could be different,
Right.
they cross-correlate a lot, but
I'm just guessing here. My guess is that they weren't really looking at assistive technology. They were looking at what happens in a regular classroom.
direct instruction type.
That their
yeah.
model, their vision of a regular classroom, how technology is being used in a regular classroom. And we are not doing that, whatever that vision is. So that's my guess. I don't think they know anything about assistive technology, which is another component, you're right, about what we do in supporting access to instruction and educational materials.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you. That was an excellent report. Appreciate it.
Lot to do.
Next is 2.01, consent agenda items, approval of the consent of 3.01, 3.02, 6.01, 6.02, 7.02, and 7.05.
I move to approve the consent agenda items as read.
I second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so it passes. Next will be 3.03. Superintendent Reichman about the feasibility study.
This is just a brief description of our proposed feasibility study. Last July, we, the board, had a meeting, a work study session, and we spent a lot of time having a very in-depth, thoughtful discussion about the dorm program on the Tucson campus. And I confess, after leaving that meeting as the superintendent, I didn't have a clear vision of where to go with this. What do I do with this information? I didn't get a sense of a consensus of what would be the best next step and what would be our path forward. So after a lot of thinking about this, I remembered that Dean Howard had recommended a feasibility study. And for me, as a superintendent, that seemed to be the most objective way to move forward. That we have an outside group come in and look at our dorm program and to answer some of the questions that we have, to collect data and information, and then to put together a report to give back to us with that additional information about possible next steps, making the recommendations. So, to that end, I put together a committee inside the agency. That committee compiled that list of questions that I sent out to you. This was a committee discussion. We put together this list of questions, and we fit them into 3 categories. One is our legal responsibility. Second is our educational responsibility and implications. And third is our fiscal implications. So we put the questions into those categories. As you know, we've already collected some information. We have gotten an informal opinion from the Arizona Attorney General Office. We have that. We've also done some internal data collection just to start looking at our dorm students. So I'm going to share that with you just a little bit right now. Principal Chrissy forwarded to me just a couple of weeks ago 5 charts, spreadsheets. And those spreadsheets looked at the dorm, the home districts of dorm students, the home districts of day students on the Tucson campus, the dorm students' tribal affiliation, the day students' tribal affiliation, and their health care providers. When we looked at that data, there was a few things that we spotted right away. For example, we have 46 dorm students that are from 27 school districts around the state. So think about that. So that means most of our students are maybe 1 or 2 from that school district. However, there are a number of school districts that have more than 1 or 2. So I'm going to detail those school districts. The first school district is the White River School District. They send us 6 dorm students. The second is 5 dorm students are from Tuba City School Districts. We have 3 from Snowflake School District and another 3 from the Cayenta School District. And then all of the others, of course, are just 1 to 2 from each school district. Of the 46 dorm students that we have, 26 are deaf and hard of hearing. In sending them back to the home school districts, that would mean we would need to hire 26 educational interpreters to work with them all day. We do have challenges, as you know, in hiring teachers and professionals in the rural areas. So we are looking at sharing resources. An example of that is the orientation and mobility specialist. We have a number of blind students in the northeast quadrant of Arizona. We've not been able to recruit and hire an O&M specialist. We have 3 on the Tucson campus. So one of them have been sent to go to the northeast quadrant. I think they go once a month to serve those students to provide orientation and mobility support. So we have a number of challenges here. So as the superintendent, I'm going to move forward with conducting the feasibility study. I also welcome your questions, your feedback, your ideas, and your thoughts as to how we can do that so that we are effective, we use our resources more effectively, and getting the kind of answers that we need, that we're looking for right now. Thank you.
Any questions or comments?
Superintendent, this is David. What's the timetable for completion of this study?
I don't know yet. The next step is to put together a scope of work and get that into our procurement process to allow for bidding to occur. I'm hoping to have something by May, April and May to give back to the board.
This is Mark Sims. I would just like to make a comment. I think what we need to do is talk about this more during the work study, because I think one of the things is we are saying perhaps sometimes the same terms, but we mean different things. So, I mean, I'll just tell you, I was surprised to get an opinion about closing or eliminating residential services for students. I thought perhaps in a different form, maybe a residential location up north or something. In my mind's eye, I never actually thought that it would be an elimination of providing residential services to the students. So we are perhaps talking about the same issue, but using different vocabulary to talk about it. So there's a difference about the physical buildings called the dorms on the Tucson campus and eliminating residential services. So that, I think, is a term of confusion in terms of what different people mean. So I think it's important that we talk about this more at the work study group so we can make sure we're all talking about kind of the same concepts. So.
If I could, this is Linda
Sure. Yes.
Sims. My name is Linda, both. And I agree with Dr. Sims that we need to establish some kind of retreat. I'd rather call it a retreat rather than a working session, because work sessions or work studies have limited time, and I feel like this is very critical for us to look at. As a board member, I want to make sure that we are immersed fully, maybe take a half day to really understand the challenge, get our questions answered, look at the feasibility study, and as Annette Reichman provided us information, we need more. We need more than this. So I feel strongly that we do need a retreat, a time for this, and really time to focus and do some deep diving and make the right decision, which will lead to a final decision as to what's best for students, deaf and hard of hearing students across the state of Arizona. Thank you. And I would like to comment, this is Shelley Herbold. I do agree with Dr. Sims' comment and Linda Bove's comment. I would also like to include the community. As James Wilson previously mentioned, to involve all stakeholders, parents, students, staff, the community, to be a part of this. They're more involved than we are. And so maybe we can have some sort of community forum established for that. Thank you.
Gordon. Annette, I was a little surprised by the last thing you said when you talked about procurement, that I guess the proposal would go to procurement and then they would issue an RFP as to who would be selected to do the feasibility study. Is that accurate?
Say that again, please.
That it sounded like the last thing you said when David asked you about a timeline for this feasibility study, you said that there would be a submission to go to AZ procurement, of which time then they would release an RFP, I'm assuming, to choose the provider who would facilitate this feasibility study. Is that accurate?
Right. Yes, that's right. We
Okay.
would have to select a proposal
Right.
to lead the study, right?
Going through procurement, though.
Wouldn't have to go through the state procurement office. we at the agency level can do that ourselves up to $100,000. I'm hoping it's less than $100,000.
Me too. Any other questions?
Yeah,
Just-
Dr. Sims,
yeah.
this is Dean Howard.
Go ahead, Dean.
No, I totally agree with what you were saying, what Linda was saying as well, on that we're not trying to eliminate the program, we're just trying to make it more efficient and reachable to our students and families. And then what Shelley said, I agree too on the community involvement piece. I kind of like to see it more of a charrette style of this is the findings that that report did, and walk the stakeholders through kind of what the vision of what, if any, and what type of changes to the program would be more beneficial to students. Like to see more something that's, like I said, that charrette style of a true community involvement. So that's maybe the next phase after the report comes out. But I like the report that I saw. This is looking promising with the right verbiage, like you said, Dr. Sims. But yes.
Any other comments? Thank you very much. Next is 4.01, introduction of new Ombudsperson, Karen Grandin.
I'm talking a lot this afternoon. I would like to introduce Ms. Karen Grandin. Ms. Karen Grandin. She just started with us last September as our new Ombudsperson.
She stood up.
She
stood up.
Yeah, sorry, lost my thought there for a moment here. Forgive me. Well, as our new Ombudsperson, if you remember, a year and a half ago, this idea came up with the board in terms of having an Ombudsperson being brought on to ASDB agency that would report directly to you about different staff and parents and school districts and other individuals who have an interest in ASDB, their concerns with us and our services in education. So Ms. Grandin comes with us with a lot of experience. She started her career as a special education teacher aide, and that intrigued her enough to go back to school to get her elementary teacher certification and to get 2 master's degrees. I only have 1, so I'm really impressed with 2. The 2 master's degrees are in special education and in rehabilitation, VR. She has served for a time in the Arizona VR system. Her last job with the state agency was as an associate deputy administrator in the VR agency here, Rehabilitation Services Administration. Before she retired, she supervised the program that served deaf and hard of hearing, blind and visually impaired, and deaf-blind clients. So she knows a lot about the population that we're working with. After retiring from that position, she continues to work with the disability community, including now with us, with ASDB. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Ms. Grandin to briefly introduce herself and talk about what she will be doing. One thing I want to remind you is that from here on out in our board agenda, you will see a report from Ms. Grandin on the ombudsman activities. So go ahead.
Not yet. They need to live the mic.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Thank you for that introduction, Annette, and it's nice to meet my new bosses all at once. As Annette said, I do have experience working with the population that ASDB serves, and I've had the pleasure recently of meeting with several different groups of ASDB staff, and you have some very talented and committed folks that work here, and I'm really excited to be part of that team. So I can tell you a little bit about what I have been active in so far as of October 4th. So I've been with you all for about 6 weeks now. And I've had a couple of different inquiries. It hasn't been a huge volume, but sort of a good variation. So by that I mean I've had some contact from staff, both classified and professional staff, and from some outside community members. And for the most part, what I've done so far is what I've been referring to a lot as sort of counseling 101. So listening to the individual that is calling or emailing and sort of talking, in some cases, talking them down off the ledge. Maybe they have just left their job and they're upset, or they have a child who they're advocating for. And then walking them through what are the issues of concern, and in most cases asking folks to sort of come up with a summary and a chronology of what they believe the issue to be. Sometimes they don't really have that in their mind, and so I've found that that has helped them to get a concrete idea for themselves about what it is that they're not necessarily disgruntled about, but concerned about. And then I ask, what is it that I can do to help you with this concern? So one of the things that I need to be really clear with folks about is my role. So I am a neutral party. I'm not going to be hiring, firing, changing policy. I am an additional resource to them and a neutral resource. So I've had folks ask if I am like a parent advocate, and I'm not. So I'm not advocating for either side of the situation. I am there to listen and hopefully problem solve and help the individuals with the concern find resolution without having to go through a formal process, whether that's an HR process, complaint, grievance, whatever it may be. So that's just a quick description of what I've done, what I hope to be doing. There are many things that Annette and Anita and I are still working on in terms of tracking how that's going to look, what you would like for me to report to you, what you want it to look like, and what's going to be helpful in determining really that there is a benefit to having an ombudsperson, woman, man, whatever you want to call it. Are there any questions for me?
This is Mark Sims. Two things. One is I think initially we like a full narrative of what's going on so we can figure out what data we want. So the more, the better, and then we can parse it down. The second comment I would say is you and I have already had some interactions, and it's not a comment, you're doing a great job, but on the existence of an ombudsperson. I spoke to somebody at a district level who was ready to rip out their hair and was ready to escalate an issue at a rather steep escalation, it seemed to me. And just the fact that you existed was a complete and total relief to them, that they knew that there was another avenue besides taking it to the mat. And so I think as a board it was the right decision, and I think it'll really help us avoid some of these conflicts that have plagued the agency on a cyclical basis. So.
I do have, with respect to community members and folks that are outside the school ability to send an email to announce me, would the board give some thought to how I am going to be announced to some of those entities, like the school districts, like partners, contractors, whoever that may be?
Yes, and we're open to any suggestions.
Okay. I will ponder that then.
Thank you.
That's a good job for us.
Can I ask this is Mike Manley, can I ask a quick question? So would your scope of work include an LEA that has a problem with ASDB?
Yes.
What's your phone number? No, but I didn't know that was part of the scope of work, so including services, just the full scope of issues that might come from the field?
Yes.
So there are lots of different access points that folks could come to me through. And essentially, it's my understanding that anyone who has any affiliation with ASDB, they can come to me. So I'm not going to subvert any of the personnel process that is in existence. I'm an additional resource for them. And they can also come to me at any point, even if they are in a formal process.
And you directly report to the superintendent?
No,
The
to the
board.
board.
To the board.
Linda Bove has a comment.
Yes, ma'am.
This is Linda Bove. And I have a question for you. I'm curious about the community. There are deaf individuals that have concerns about the school, about the curriculum, about language. Parents may have concerns with their children. Can those individuals come to you as well? Members
Yes.
of the community?
Yes.
Okay, that is good news. Thank you very much. Happy to hear that.
Lynn Davison, I just wanted to say welcome.
Thank
We're glad
you.
you're on board.
I am too.
This is Mark Sims. Just a comment in terms of the concept. It's not to you, it's to the community. The point is not, though, to create a circumventional system to go around the administration. The point is the hope is that it's where you aren't getting your issues addressed through the normal channels, and then they come to you, not, I don't want to go to the administration, so I go to the Ombudsperson. So I would expect perhaps some of them would be just you circling back and saying, well, you need to take it to the administration first.
Well, what I've been explaining to folks as I go around is that I will not be telling anyone what to do in terms of, well, you should now file a complaint or you should now do this personnel system, unless, of course, I have a duty to report if someone's a danger to themselves or others, then I have to take a different tact. But essentially, I am not making that decision for anyone. I'm helping them understand what their options are and what's available to them. And again, hopefully helping them problem solve prior to pursuing anything formally.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, 5.01, Finance Committee Report. Ms. Cooper.
Good afternoon, President Sims, members of the board, Superintendent Reichman, and Assistant Superintendent Rex, and ASD community. Each of the board members have been provided with a report for business services, which summarizes any informational items and the comparative financial data for the months ended September 30, 2018, and September 30, 2017. During the work session following today's full board meeting, I will try to bridge the gap between strategic planning and budgeting, and I will walk each of you through the agency's fiscal year 19 budget and also try to help you each better understand the reports that have been provided. In our in our Finance Committee meeting, which was held on October 25th, I will go ahead and summarize for you some key points. In that meeting, we discussed our fiscal year 19 approved budget from the state, which totaled $55 million. However, after careful review and consideration, our revised internal budget totaled $57.8 million, which meant at that time we were projecting a $2.8 million budget deficit. The revised budget, based upon leveling our operating expenses with the prior year after payroll projections were made, which consisted mainly of the $1.6 million due to the increase in the 21 new ECFE teachers, as well as the $470,000 one-time allotment for the vehicles for each of those specialists. Additionally, there is $1.9 million in salary increases for our teachers, interpreters, and minimum wage increases for other staff, as well as the cost of living increases for all other staff below an annual salary of $100,000 was also taken into consideration when we were developing our budget. The projected $2.8 million budget deficit will be addressed by the expected increase in our voucher revenues, potential vacancy savings, as well as some use of our cash. And if you have the reports in front of you, I wanted to also point out where we are in terms of our collected revenues. In comparison to last year's revenues, we have seen an increase of about $1.7 million, and excuse me, that's a $1.7 million decrease when compared to last year. And that primarily is due to some calendar issues with our preschool vouchers, as well as some integrity errors that are currently being addressed or have already been addressed. These issues currently have an effect on the associated voucher revenue, as well as our fee-for-service revenues as well. We will, by the end of November, early December, actually see our revenues increase. So there really is no concerns at this time, but I will continue to monitor our revenues and expenses appropriately. You will also notice our expenditures of $11.9 million, which is slightly up by about $1.5 million in comparison to last year, is mainly due to the increase of the total payroll that I just mentioned, as well as an increase of $500,000 that we transferred out to the state's Department of Administration due to the Tucson campus gas line repairs. In addition to the standard budget to actual reports that I indicated, I also mentioned that I would also, on a quarterly basis, provide financial statements which would show our financial condition as well as the results of our operations. And with that information, you will see an increase of about $5.4 million, which mainly consists of about $2.4 million due to the $2.1 million lump sum payment that we received for the funding of the ECFE monies. Also, you'll notice that our revenues for the fiscal year have slightly decreased, and as I mentioned, that's due to the voucher revenue and fee-for-service revenues that have decreased. Overall, our total operating expenses have decreased. However, our professional and outside services has taken into consideration that and has shown that respectively, which is offset by our increase in personnel expenditures. And that really summarizes our cash, our revenues, and expenses. And at this time, I'll open it up for any questions or comments.
Any questions or comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is 7.01 for Maria Murphy, introduction and possible discussion of multiple policies.
Good afternoon, Board President Sims, members of the board, Superintendent Reichman, Assistant Superintendent Rex, members of the community. This is Maria Murphy. You have before you the proposed changes for the policies. They were presented to the policy subcommittee. There were no concerns via the policy subcommittee. They were also posted on the website for public comment. No public comment was received. However, I would like to make myself available for any questions if you have them.
Any questions or comments? Thank you. You can stay there.
Okay.
7.03, action item, urgent adoption or revision to policy IHB.
Correct. So this policy, IHB, is in regards to special education. And unfortunately, we are asking that this be done via urgency approval because the model language was received by us during the first week of October, which did not give us enough board meetings to follow our usual policy of a first read and then a vote during a second read. They have to be submitted to the Arizona Department of Education by January 1st, 2019. The changes were forwarded to the policy subcommittee. there were some questions and some revisions, some minor revisions were made to the policy based on the suggestions of the policy subcommittee. This policy was also posted to the website as well for public comment. No public comment was received, but I can make myself available for any questions at this time.
So I'm guessing you're going to need a motion to adopt this
Yes.
policy?
That's correct.
I
think we
so
need
move.
a motion first to suspend our normal rule.
That is correct.
Oh,
Correct.
okay, sorry. I'll let you do that one.
Go ahead.
I'm not sure which policy it is, but I move that we suspend our
Board
typical
policy.
rule, typical board rule regarding bringing an item up for information first and then acting on it at the second board meeting.
I second that.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
It's approved. Is there another motion?
Aye.
So the second motion would be, I move to accept the policy changes as submitted.
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
7.04, approval of donations. It's an action item. Yeah, it's not on the consent agenda, so we need a motion.
I move that we approve donations.
I second it.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay.
Excuse me,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. This is Linda Bove. I have a question about this one. I can't vote without knowing what it is. Approval of donations. Donations of what?
If you look in the agenda, it
The-
specifies the
The
amount of money.
foundation? Okay, got you. Okay, just wanted to make sure I'm clear
Sure.
and didn't miss anything.
That's fine.
The Sentinel Swing? What is that? What is a Sentinel Swing?
Go ahead.
It's an account that started when they had,
It's the trust, right?
it was like used for, it was a golf tournament that they used to do to raise funds, but that, now it's being used for other things to help out the students.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
We're going to still consider that a passed motion. Okay?
Yes, okay.
Next is 7.06, set the calendar for the regular board meetings. So this is for the whole year.
I move to approve the proposed meeting schedule for 2019.
Linda Bove, I have a question.
Sure.
So there are 6. I'm just curious as to why we choose to meet 6 times. I've seen other school boards that meet 4 times a year, and they also have time for their retreat. So is that typical to have 6, or just as to curious why there's 6?
This is Mark Sims here. For the first year I was on the board, I think we had in the neighborhood of 40 meetings. So we're trying to keep them, be respectful of people's time. We have also had retreats in the past, and one of the issues we've had is people setting aside time on weekends to attend, and that's why we've moved to the work study format immediately following. We find we get better attendance if people just go from the board meeting right into the work study group. But by and large, we've been able to cover the things every other month-ish during the school year. And then if there is an issue that becomes pressing or needs to it, we've had in the past telephonic boards, or we've had board meetings where they've all been in person. So it's kind of a framework. And then based on the need of the agency, we would add more, but this is the minimum amount.
Okay. And then with the work session, we do that every meeting? We have a work session after the board meeting?
No, we have generally not done that. We've
okay,
been
but-
doing it about every other.
Yeah, it might. Right, and I understand. My point is with 6 board meetings, not having a work session every time, we may need a work session longer than 2 hours. So I'm just curious if there's any other way of using our time, instead of a work session, having a retreat. You know, maybe we need to bring in a presenter to discuss a certain topic. I believe in a 2-hour work session, we wouldn't have time for that. So that's what I'm saying. I just thought of, can we not change this, or can we talk about it more?
These are the formal board meetings. And then the addition of extra time for the board to get together is up to the purvey of the board to decide that.
Okay, so during the meeting, we can decide whether or not we need to add time.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. There's a motion on the floor. Has it been seconded?
I second it.
Okay. All in favor of approving the 2019 board calendar, say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Next is 7.07, election of the board officers pursuant to board policy. So we need to elect a secretary, and we need to elect a board president at this meeting.
This is
Yeah.
Shelley. I would like to propose Sue Kay for board president, and Linda second.
Okay. Any other nominations?
This is Gordon. I'd like to nominate Dean Howard, please.
Do we have a second?
Dean Howard.
I'd second that.
Okay. So it seems like we're going to do president first. So, I think the first thing would be for both of them to indicate whether or not they are not willing. This is not imprisonment, it's voluntary.
That's pretty fun. Kay, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I was going to say, this is Suke. I am interested and willing.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is Dean Howard. I'd be more than happy to fill that spot as well.
This is an unusually good problem. In the past, that has not been the case. So I don't know from a policy point of view what you do next. I guess we can go across the board and people can say who they're going to vote for. There's 2 people, and then obviously whoever gets the majority would be the next board president, I assume as much.
Should we have an opportunity to ask questions of the?
If people wish, yes, that's fine. Any questions for either?
I have a question. So if you're not president, would you be willing to be secretary?
Perfect.
For both of them?
This is Suke,
Any
yes.
chance I'm sorry, Sue Kay, go ahead.
This is Suke, yes, I would take either.
Yes.
Yeah, and I echo that statement too.
I would like to make a comment, and that was, you've done an excellent job being the secretary, and congratulations on your retirement.
Who wants the book?
She doesn't do it for the pay. Any other questions?
This is Shelley. Maybe you can comment, Suke, on how you can help us move forward along with the mission and vision for ASDB.
Just me?
Or both?
Well, both.
Okay.
Yes, both.
That's an excellent question, actually. I would hope that the progress that we have made so far, we can continue moving in that vein. I think there has, how I can personally, I think my role within DES and my collaboration with the school, both campuses, keeps me pretty engaged on a day-to-day basis, if not a weekly and monthly basis as well. So I think my involvement just not only on the board but outside collaborating with the school, I have a pretty good sense of what goes on. And I think we have a good leadership team at this point, and we need to become more oversight and provide directionality, but let them do their jobs.
This is Dean. Could I get the question repeated because it broke up? I think I know the gist of it, but I just want to make sure I answer it, all of it, right?
Sure, this is Shelley. Oh, geez, what did I say? Regarding your skills and qualifications, what can you do to help ASDB move forward, specifically with your involvement, and what would that look like?
I got to do it one more time. I'm sorry. That phone it's breaking up really bad. And I'm not on a cell phone, by the way. I'm on a landline.
I think the interpreter needs to say it louder.
Yep.
Just talk about your vision, what your involvement would look like in order to move ASDB forward as we continue to grow and progress. What would your involvement look like?
Okay. I totally heard it that time. So, I can't echo more than what Sue Kay said. The only differential is that, Sue's experience in her day-to-day operations for work. Mine's a little bit different just because I'm a parent. My daughter's deaf, as you all know, and I understand the challenges for her, the community, parents, and all stakeholders involved. My background affords me the knowledge of the legislative process, the public involvement process, and also understanding a board, should be more policy-driven rather than in the weeds with staff and trying to control that. I say we, the board and staff, our superintendent has done such a great job over the last couple of years. Compared to where it's been, I never saw it, but I've just seen nothing but growth and good potential. I don't want to lose that momentum. The issue with the residential program, I think there's some very positive things that can come out of that because we all think very positively. And you have two people right here that are wanting to be board president and or secretary and are willing to step up to the plate. And me, I'm a volunteer. So my time is going to be committed to this more so than it has been. But again, I just see this board as more of a policy-driven board, as it should be. I hope that answers your question.
Yes. This is Linda Bove. May I, Dr. Sims? I have a question as well. For Mr. Howard, what is your position again on the board? If you wouldn't mind, refresh my memory. I'm still fairly new to the board. So can you talk again about your position?
Sure. I believe my position based on the governor's appointment is as a parent and of a student who's deaf. Not a student, excuse me, a child who's deaf.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Dean, this is David. My question is, I went through it back through the last 12 meetings and looked through the record. I saw that you were absent for 3 of them. You were on the telephone 4 times. You were late twice, and you were present and on time 3 times. What can you tell us about your level of commitment if we were to elect you president today?
Well, thanks, David. I appreciate that. And there's no excuses for meeting board meetings and being late to those things other than the commitments I have for work. The differentiator for some of us on the board is that we're volunteers. It's not necessarily part of our job responsibilities on the board. That's just the way the dynamic is. I've been in and out of both politics on the policy side, on the staff side. I understand the commitment when you're taking a different role on the board. I compare it to a city manager or a mayor in that realm that you need to step that involvement up. in the back of my mind, it turns into the things would need to do is being more engaged with staff, being more engaged with activities at the school, understanding more deeply about what that is and how it works. You can't just kind of go by and skim the top. I understand that commitment. I'm prepared to do that. I just think it's a much bigger commitment in understanding all the workings and processes that Mark has done for the last number of years. And by the way, just so you know, my employer is Rosendin Electric. I mean, it's an old client of mine that hired me full-time 3 years ago. They completely understand my commitment to this group and have expressed full support of my involvement.
Linda Bobe, I have a question
Mm-hmm.
for Dean Howard. Prior to myself joining the board, I wasn't aware of how much is really involved, what goes on in this school. So I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind telling me, because I don't really know you well, what will your involvement look like if you're president? Going into the classroom, meeting parents, meeting teachers, being in the community, what will that look like for you?
You know, I got to give it as an example, and that's a really good question because, and I like to draw comparisons of what my experience has been in my jobs and other boards that I've been on, and you know there have been quite a few, but the one I keep going back to is when I worked at the City of Phoenix. You know, I couldn't explain to a constituent that was upset when I was working in the council office, when they were upset with something going on in their neighborhood, whether the trash wasn't picked up or their streets were in bad or in disrepair. The only way I could figure that out was go out with the people who did that job on a daily basis and understand it inside and out. And I think that's what this takes. Dr. Sims has done that, and I think that needs to continue. This just can't be somebody who's going to drive policy and not understand what the implications of that policy are. I've got experience doing that, and it's something I think that the board president should do. And as board members, we should, but again, on the volunteer side, I just feel sometimes there's a little bit of a different expectation, but this is definitely a heightened position on the board for that involvement. I hope that answered your question. Is there a follow-up?
No, thank you.
Any other questions? Well, I guess we can go down the line and just start, I don't know, either way. Go ahead, we'll start with Linda and go down in terms of you can express, I mean, there's two, so obviously it'll
Are we expressing
a vote.
or is it the actual vote or is it not a straw vote?
Whichever. I'm not sure I understand the question.
Sorry, I just want to clarify. This is not a straw vote, or is this us expressing our opinion?
I think you can go ahead and do the, I mean, if there are more questions or comments, people can do that, and then we can go to, if you wish to do that, and then we'll go to a vote.
Okay.
Any comments or things that people would like to say? Well, I'm sorry, Linda, we're going to offer an opportunity for people to make any comments, and then people are more than welcome if they want to say a comment at the time of their vote, they can do that as well. I will take the one prerogative, which as the president, I will vote last.
Okay, this is Linda. And I would like to make a comment. This comment is regarding Sue Kay, and you can see that she is my obvious choice. The reason being, she has been involved in many different ways. She is involved on the rehabilitation side, certainly, but I have seen her work with the Ombudsperson on that committee. I sat with her during that process, so I saw the kinds of questions that she asked and her commitment to that process, her care and concern for our students, and her familiarity and investment in our community as well as the school. And I feel like she is by far the best fit for the position. She's very approachable, she's friendly, she's easy to talk to, she's around a lot. Many of the staff, teachers, parents already know her and are comfortable with her. Community members as well. So I would like to share that information, and clearly that is who I will be voting for.
Okay.
And this is Shelley Herbold. I will go ahead and express my vote for Sue K as well. And I would like to comment as to why. Sue K has worked with deaf, hard of hearing, blind, and visually impaired, as well as a variety of other people with disabilities in her work under RSA. I have seen what she does. I have seen her impartiality, her ability to help problem solve various issues. I have seen her involvement in a wide variety of community events, not just related to RSA, but very, very wide-reaching. I've seen her involvement extensively. Regarding Dean Howard, I have only seen him occasionally at board meetings. I don't see his involvement in participation, so I have very limited understanding of what he has to bring to the table. So for that reason, I'm voting for Sue K.
Well, as the proxy for the superintendent, I don't want to say I just want to watch the governor's folks duke it out. I think that either way, ASDB is going to be heading in the right direction. In the best of all circumstances, we'd have a unified, unanimous vote. It's kind of impossible to do that if you've got two folks going for the same part. The fact that we've roped you both into doing one of two jobs, I think, is the win-win that we might be looking for. But honestly, regardless of how my vote goes, it's not a no vote for the other person at all. If anything, we need to have a united board to look at what the mission and vision of ASDB is and move in that direction. I think that taking a look at some of the questions that have been asked over the last 6 or 7 months, I don't have any hesitation voting for either candidate person. Is it a candidate if you're looking at a board person? When you look at some of the healing that needs to happen and some of the discussions that we've had for the early childhood direction for how language acquisition needs to have options, and it needs to continue to make sure that we're listening to parents. The parents are the most important. You're not going to find a better advocate for a child than their mom and dad or their caregiver. And I think based on that, I would have to cast my vote for Dean, in that he will be advocating for the deaf long after there's any association with ASDB. So with that, that's how I'd vote.
I skipped you. It's okay. I apologize. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to skip you. I just. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, are you finished?
Did I get skipped?
No.
So
No, I skipped David.
So can I take my back and switch it?
You
Or
can do
just
whatever you want.
no. David, go ahead. Sorry,
Sorry, David.
stole your thunder.
So, so there's I am voting on the motion to vote for one of these. Okay. This is David. Yeah, I think both candidates would be excellent. Dean, I know, is very capable, as well as Suke. Again, as I had mentioned, I really and would like to see a much bigger commitment from Dean if he were to be president. Mark has done a great job in terms of being president the last few years. He's very present. He's meeting with the superintendent to set the agenda, to make sure that the meetings run smoothly. He's present for the meetings. He's not late. He runs the meetings smoothly. I think that's all operational skills that are needed. I know that Dean tells us that he's going to make that commitment. I certainly hope that he does, because we need the president to be here and to be present. I will vote for Dean as well.
Mike.
I have to concur with what everyone said as far as the opportunity to be in such a favorable position of having two good candidates. Last year, I was nominated to possibly be selected as board president. I had to pass because I thought there was not necessarily a conflict of interest, but as my position at Southern Arizona Savvy Services for the Blind, I felt that we serve enough children that it was not probably the best connection for me to actually also be in a leadership role here. As such, I know I work with Sue Kay on many different things. She's a good partner and an excellent colleague in relation to the contracts that we hold. But sometimes I think that there's a closeness there that sometimes might not always be to the greatest advantage. I think as we go forward, there might be some rapids that have to be navigated as we go down that river, possibly in a hollowed-out bamboo canoe. And consequently, I think that Dean is in a position that he can possibly can possibly look at some of these things from a new position, and not knowing how he would react to anything. I think I welcome that newness. So my vote would be with Dean.
Sue Kay? Everybody votes. You're a board member.
Oh.
You don't have to give an explanation. You're more than welcome to.
Well, I'm going to cast my vote for me. I didn't know I had to vote.
Dean?
Yeah, I think I have to echo Sue Kay on that one too. So vote for myself, yeah.
Okay. Lynn?
I don't want to vote. I think we have two excellent candidates. I know them both fairly well. I've had many discussions with Dean, and Suke and I work very well together.
By the way, she asked to go second to last.
Yeah, and I still haven't decided. Can I recuse myself? I really am tossed. I'm going to go last. It's a tough decision. I think I'll go with Suke.
I just want to make a comment more about the board president. Each time I came here for an election, I agreed to serve the first time with the selection of Annette, and I think it's been a wonderful success selecting her. The reason that I continued on the board as the president wasn't because that was my aspirational goal. It was because there was nobody else who was capable or willing to do it. And I think it's a testament of where we've come in terms of the board and the agency, that there are people who want to step up, and I think the board keeps on getting stronger and stronger. I'm going to vote for Dean. I'm an advocate of the parents, and that's who I'm going to vote for board. So the next president will be Dean Howard, and the next secretary will be Suke. Thank you.
Hey, Mark, this is Dean. I just want to tell everybody thank you for that, and I think you're going to see the kind of commitment that I think y'all are expecting, and I'm looking forward to working with you, Sue, and everybody on the board in the school. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody. It's a great day, just that we have people who want to step up and lead. So thank you so much to everybody. And I think that we've got two very powerful and strong leaders who have great to offer to the agency. So thank you very much. By the way, that's good. Somebody else takes over the gavel, and I'll be perfectly happy to sit to the side. To finish up, 8.01. Call to the public for non-agendized items. We have two. First up is Ronald Hazlitt-Tully.
Hello. I'm here to talk about ASDB and the Miles Exploratory Center, and that's a school in Tucson. And those are two separate entities. I feel like it's important to disclose that the number of enrolled students at ASDB, of course, we've seen that number decrease. Over at Miles Learning Center, the number has actually been expanding. And so our buildings are getting too small for us, and we're becoming cramped. So we are taxpayers as well. We pay our taxes to the state, we pay our taxes to federal entities and to city entities. The state then uses those funds to fund ASDB. Now the city pays for Miles. So that means as a taxpayer, they may be wondering why we're paying for two separate entities to two different buckets. My suggestion is that Miles students and employees may transfer and move on to the ASDB campus. And the reasoning for that is because you have many classrooms that are vacant. And so we want to offer those to the Tucson schools to be able to learn and use those buildings on the ASDB campus. ASDB campus has 2 football fields. You have swimming, you have rec centers, you've got cafeterias, lots of different organizations and opportunities on campus. Someone had mentioned that as Miles grows, we could potentially ask ASDB if we can come into some of the vacancies on your campus, and ASDB had responded with a resounding no. And we are kind of stuck separate. And so I'd like to propose that you consider partnering with Miles on the campus. As taxpayers, we are funding the ASDB campus, and we'd like to have those funds converge onto one campus rather than funding 2 separate campuses. And that would be following Arizona education law, providing services to all deaf and hard of hearing students within ASDB. No barriers whatsoever. And that would mean that state and city, who historically have funded and provided education separately, would need to stop. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Danny Lawrence.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Danny Lawrence. I've driven from Flagstaff today to express to you how difficult it is to be a parent dealing with services up north. In 2015, Flagstaff Unified School District ended their contractual relationship with ASDB in large part because of the FERPA violations caused by working with your agency and my family. In 2017, they reestablished their agreement with several assurances made by ASDB to our school board and superintendent that have not been followed through. My 10-year-old son has received Braille services from this agency since 2012, entirely taught up until now without the use of any curriculum. The North Central Cooperative uses no formal curriculum for helping children learn Braille literacy despite several known programs existing that are utilized in other cooperatives. Additionally, we are on our 6th VI teacher in 3 years because NRC allows their teachers to quit working with our family when my husband or myself challenges in any way why ASDB VI staff can't simply follow IEPs. The conflict has caused over 40 states complaints and for our school district, and we have several pending today due to the inability of the VI teacher to report progress. Open record requests of this agency regarding technology expenditures for your cooperative indicate discriminatory treatment for children living in northern Arizona, and I hope to expose those discrepancies to anyone willing to listen. Despite having double the amount of visually impaired children than other cooperatives, the North Central Cooperative spent significantly less than their other counterparts on assistive technology. But even if they had technology, the staff there wouldn't know how to use it, and they have no training support to know how to use it. In fact, NCR didn't even have an embosser until 3 months ago, and has had an open Brailleist position for 2 years that isn't even being advertised. Just recently, it was suggested that I should send my son to ASDB to live in residential treatment to learn Braille, and I've also heard that that strategy is employed with other students in northern Arizona. A perfectly healthy child, minus one eye for today, recommended to live away from people he loves because your staff can't teach Braille with curriculum or follow an IEP. Additionally, the open records requests we made for email correspondences prove the discriminatory track record of NRC's former director toward our family specifically. There was no supervision of VI teachers who dealt with my son. The director never attended an IEP meeting or supported ASDB staff whatsoever, much less our student. Finally, you have systemic issues here in terms of accountability, and it starts from the top down. Promises made to us on every level have just either been ignored, half-answered, or just not followed through. At this point, my school board is listening and reconsidering the contractual relationship they have with the ASDB, since there appears currently 9 ways with which their contract is being violated. Open records requests go unanswered at this hour. The report you all received in September regarding our family was half true and failed to represent that our school board president also attended the meeting that we had with your superintendent. So I'm here out of desperation to convey my intent to treat this organization how I've been treated for 6 years, and I will be returning as often as possible until something is done. It's taken a toll. It's been a long road, due process, states complaints, and a child going to middle school next year only still knowing first grade Braille. As board members, now that you know, I hope you have some personal responsibility here to make it better for students in northern Arizona, because when we know better, we do better, right? Thank you.
Thank you. Next, 9.01, adjournment.
I move to adjourn this meeting.
Oh, wait. Oh, I'm sorry. Yep,
Agenda.
8.02. You're right. Boy, I'm trying to get there. Agenda items for the next board meeting. Anything people would like discussed? You seem like you have something on the edge of your seat there, Superintendent. Oh, okay. Any particular issues? Linda? Linda?
Yes, Linda Bowe speaking. I would like to see on the agenda at the next board meeting the feasibility study to start that process of gathering information and learning more. I know that it's going to be presented in April, but I would like to know if we can get started, if possible.
All right. Anything else? All right, sorry for jumping there. 9.01, action item, adjournment.
I move to adjourn this meeting. I'm adjourned, guys.
I second it. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you, everybody.